Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I am on here today with Lincoln Stoller. He is a mind, strength, balance focused personality who is he's got his PhD, CHT. He's got a bunch of initials. I don't even know what they all stand for, but he's got experience in science, business, project management, teaching, biofeedback training, and hypnotherapy. He's got his PhD in quantum many-body theory out of the University of Texas in Austin. He's a hypnotherapist, International Medical and Dental Hypnotherapy Association, and also a clinical counselor, Canadian College of Professional Counselors and Psychotherapists. Lincoln, thanks for being on today. I know that you reached out to me just to kind of pop on and have a conversation, I guess, around the psychedelic realm, right? And spirituality.
Right. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's actually kind of funny. One of my clients was out of the University of Texas in Austin once upon a time. So small world. So I usually like to start these off with the whole idea that you and I were just basically conduits for universal energy, right? It is flowing through us at all times, and like we kind of we're just expressing life energy one way or another. And when we have this conversation, you and I are talking to each other. We think we know what we're talking about to each other, but the person listening in they're hearing something totally different, right? And there's a message that can only be delivered through you today to that person and listening. What is that message that's coming through you today, Lincoln?
That we're part of an evolving system that's bigger than we are. In your little intro there, I would say I always feel like I'm talking to the culture, a kind of really amorphous being that's made up of all our little ant minds. And I don't know what it's hearing. I'd like to think it's hearing better, but I'm not sure it is.
Nah, fair enough. I love it. Talking to the culture, that's a mind shift right there, right? Just kind of right off the bat, and I appreciate that. And in terms of like evolving and whatnot, where do you think you see evidence for that? Because that's something that's been ratcheting around in my mind recently. Is that every culture, every society thinks that they're the pinnacle of it,
right?
So where do you believe you see the evidence of evolution?
Well, I think evolution is easier to redefine than define. So I would redefine it as a feedback process where a system tries to optimize itself. I think the best example is a fungus, a fungus or a mold. I think, unfortunately, cultures, humans and otherwise, reach somewhat blindly toward opportunity, and then they get burned, and hopefully they learn. They usually don't. That's the sad part. And as individuals, I think we do much better. I'm a total individual focused guy, really like to the point of anarchy, basically. I think individuals contribute the main force of culture. And then, of course, we're immersed in it. It's the soup we're boiled in. I think, just as I assume, in fact, most of the listeners would agree with me that we're kind of on the edges of culture, or the boundaries, if you want to be more, self-satisfied about it. The forward boundary, put it that way, to make us all happy. And we might be leading culture, although I'm not even sure leading and trailing is fair. But the psychedelics, the old Terence McKenna. I don't know. It wasn't his idea. The stoned monkey idea. And also there's the 100th monkey idea, which I think could both be debunked fairly literally, but taken figuratively. The more of us who expand our minds, the more the culture will expand its whatever it is, mind, consciousness, awareness. So I think, this is my whole story about, becoming enlightened and becoming able. It's an uphill battle because you're gaining, breadth and depth in the context that lacks that. It could be a personal context or a cultural, legal, social, all that stuff. So right now we're expanding, and the listeners are expanding too. As you said, it was a mind shift, and that's what I'd say is the most useful mind shift. Whatever problems you're having as an individual are not entirely yours, and whatever advances you make are not entirely yours either. They're shared.
So, kind of like this, I love the edges of the culture, but as a culture, as what was Jung saying?
A lot of stuff. What do you think of
that? Carl, he's the collective conscious.
Yeah.
Right. Is that kind of what you're talking to?
I don't know. I think, Jung was almost 100 years ago. I think we have to do better than that. I think it's collective unconscious, collective conscious. I don't know who speaks for it. I think it, sort of like these pseudopods reach out. I'm teaching my son who's 11 something about history, and I keep coming back, and we all keep coming back to German fascism and how insane that was. But it keeps happening. He wasn't the last, he wasn't the first. And before he became our enemy, he was our friend. And, he came from a culture that is our culture. And it was less than 100 years ago. And it's scary. So here we now take psychedelics. And, to put it in the most dire framework, we still have a world filled with Hitlers and Stalins, but now they're called Putin and whatever. And now put those guys on psychedelics. And holy shit. I'm a little concerned.
Right? Well, right. I think putting people who have let power kind of already go to their heads, and put them on psychedelics. It's definitely be an interesting trip, to say the least. But let's talk real quick though too. As you're talking about like edges of culture, leading culture or trailing it, right? It also just, and you're throwing the word expansion in there too. It just always makes me think of like the edges of the universe, right? And we are creating that. We are the edge of the universe, right? We are that edge of the culture that's continually growing and expanding. And to that end, is that the mind? And you talk about mind expansion. I'm just kind of curious, even what you mean by mind expansion, right?
Right. Yeah, I could say.
What's that look like to you?
I think it has to be seen broadly that there's a mind body, that a good aspect of who we are is stored in our body in terms of how we think, what we think, how we react, what we are alert to. It's stored in our memory, again, in terms of how we react and associate with things. If you put it all together, that makes a mind. I'm not entirely reductionist, though I think I sound that way, but I'm trying to break things into pieces that I can swallow. Mm-hmm. And I fully recognize that some of these pieces don't fully disconnect. So like mind and body, you can't really tell them apart. They're constantly talking to each other and influencing each other. And one of the most effective ways to look at it, us and mind in general, there are many, but one that I keep coming back to, is intellect versus emotion, where intellect can be reasonable and rational, deductive, inferential, all kinds of this stuff. And emotion is very different. It's almost always holistic and vague and so forth. And our culture still doesn't give a lot of respect to emotions. They say, yeah, you can be emotional, a great actor, a great presence, charismatic, but you've got to translate it into, intellect, logic, reason. And that just doesn't work, especially in the realm of psychedelics and in the realm of dreams and trance. Sometimes you can get it, but not always.
Yeah, even in the spiritual space, right? Just I think in things spiritual, right? Trying to translate that feeling, the sense of knowing, into something that somebody will accept, right? Is very challenging. I like the idea of the intellect versus the emotion, and the other piece where you say there's some of these things don't connect, like the body mind. And it makes me think of
don't disconnect. I say
it makes me think of how other cultures outside of Western cultures, they don't have separate words for body and mind. They don't have separate words for heart and mind. Right? It's when you get to the Western culture that we separate that. So we've made some type of separation forcibly by accident, by our choice of how we speak. Yes, right. And so trying to reintegrate that is a challenge. How are you seeing that? What are you doing for your clients, I guess, to help them get, connect the two, or recognize that they are connected, and that it's okay?
Well, it's a little complicated because different clients have different barriers. I would say, forgive me for, again, being somewhat reductive, but there are different answers to that question. So, some of the kind of clients I would characterize are the confused people who know they're confused, the conflicted people who don't know whose problem this is and are trying to figure it out. And then, there are the people who somatize their problem and it manifests as a physical ailment. And they're very interesting. And they're also difficult because unless you're a doctor, which I'm not, I'm dealing with the mind and I'm trying to get back to the body. Right. So what I do with people, I think the first thing you do is to establish some trust. It doesn't have to be deep trust. It doesn't have to be, whatever. Just whatever it is, there's a level of trust. You work it to some viable point. Maybe it's intellectual, maybe it's emotional, cultural, whatever. And then I basically try to get them out of their heads. Because this whole intellectual approach, pretty much, people have reached, we're good at it. We're good at being intellectuals. That's the Western model. And if progress has stalled, it's probably not because of lack of intellectualism. It's probably because too much intellectualism, too much, not enough spiritual, emotional, experiential stuff. So I try to get people out of their heads. And you do that by either reminding them of what's important that they're suppressing, or confusing them to the point where they stop trying to, intellectualize anything.
Like a koan?
Yeah, but more directly as a trance. That's what hypnotherapy is about. You take them into a realm where the koan becomes real. So you try to get away from even language. So not just poetry, closer to music or rhythm or emotion or body feeling. So getting them into that's where I find progress, at least for people who are looking for progress. Some people are looking for fun, which is fine. But even if you're looking for fun, I think progress can be fun. I'm not even defining fun is not so easy either.
Right. I think that when you mentioned that there's not enough spiritual, emotional, and experiential, sometimes I think fun and play are a couple of those things that
Right.
are certainly missing, and allow for a reconnection to the body, get into that flow state, and I mean, let loose, right? And quite literally let loose. Your body
Right. Absolutely.
releases that tension and whatever else is kind of stored up in there. And,
Yeah. Right.
You're in a totally different space. Yeah, I can see that for sure.
So imagine you get a client and they have a problem and they're focused on the problem, or they have a diagnosis and they're focused on the diagnosis. So how do you get from a diagnosis to fun? And I think that's a serious question, because learning doesn't go very far if it's not fun. Right? I mean, if you have to learn and it hurts 100%. Every time, shit, that's not a great learning environment. So how do you get somebody who has cancer to get to fun? And you say, that's impossible, that's ridiculous. But it's not exactly. If you sort of redefine fun as empowerment, progress, control, hope, things that uplift you. I mean, maybe they don't make you laugh, but, a really empowered person could laugh even in the worst circumstances. Well, maybe that's kind of hopeful, but
the possibility does exist.
I think so.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about how did you get into the psychedelic space of this whole thing, right? Like, I know that you've got a wide, varied past, and it covers a lot of different ground. But one of the things we're going to chat about today is again kind of the psychedelics and this both spiritual and mental health aspects.
Well, I didn't come as a healer. I came into it as an adventurer. I'd say I came into everything I did as an adventurer. And the thing that differentiates an adventurer is that we are reckless, because we were looking for adventure. We're not looking for answers. We're not looking for accolades. We're really fed by adventure. So I started as a mountaineer, which is very adventurous. And then I got into physics, which is pretty adventurous, especially if you do it as in a rebellious way, like I did, and have everybody throw you out of their class because you ask too many questions. But, and that's very sobering at first. You think, they think do they think I'm a jerk? Do they think I'm wrong? That I can't follow the program? And it takes a long time to realize the benefit of not fitting in a field where there's progress to be made. Mm-hmm. Maybe in some fields, like these are fields I don't know anything about: dentistry, welding. Actually, I do know something about welding. Structural engineering. Maybe those are fields where you don't want to be an explorer, or at least you don't want to be held accountable for your mistakes. But in most things, you do have to be held accountable for your mistakes, and you have to be able to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. A good explorer is careful but curious. So my initial explorations in psychedelics were, as many in the underground are, I did not do it recklessly as a teenager. I didn't even start doing it in earnest until I was probably close to 40, and did it through these ceremonial things, mostly ayahuasca ceremonies and the derivatives of those, indigenous things, and some of the spiritual stuff that came out of Esalen, like sensory deprivation and Vipassana meditation and stuff like that. So those were explorations. And
so so you didn't come across it to initially for like spiritual awakening or any of this other stuff. It was just kind of like, hey, here's this, give it a shot. What do you think? Kind of thing.
A little more focused. Just trying it. No, not quite like that. It was more like, I want to find out what's over there. It was more curiosity than recreation.
What was leading that? What was leading that? What were you looking for?
Well, that's what I didn't know, but like all these people were talking about enlightenment and spiritual cosmic consciousness, and I'm saying, well, I don't know what that is. I live in a circumscribed, Western world where the questions are, in the back of the textbook.
Right.
And now you're telling me that it's, all around me. Well, first thing you hit on religion, which says, get down on your knees because God is looking at you all the time. And I'm saying, well, I don't see him or her or them. And let's go find him. Why not? It's like going into the wilderness, all the animals flee. So what if, the divine is doing that too? They see you coming and they say, oh God, here's another, environmentally rapacious moron. And you smile, but the truth is that higher states of consciousness do flee from stupid people.
Makes sense.
They don't get tangled up with your problems. It's like, if you're not ready for it, they don't have any time to waste.
Right.
They're not going to make the argument that you should behave better or you should listen more carefully to your heart. You got to be there, and then you'll hear it.
Yeah.
So this was my attitude.
Your attitude was
toward the psychedelics. To hear it.
The psychedelics.
Hear it, see it, and what does it take? Mountaineering was helpful because you get in situations where you really feel like you got to be on top of a situation that's dangerous or out of control, and you got to listen really carefully, and maybe you'll hear something. It's an interesting thing that you will hear. You're not going to hear a voice speaking to you, the wisdom of the universe. You're going to hear the crackling of the snow or the blowing of the wind. And that's one source of wisdom. I don't know if it's in the wind or it's in your acute hearing, or both. But that was part of it. So, for example, I climbed El Cap by a difficult route when I was 17, which was quite young. And, quite an experience. You're up on the wall for 6 days. And you start to become accustomed to a vertical world, and things start to become rote, and the sense of twirling around at the end of a rope like a spider, 4,000 feet above the ground starts to become sort of normal. It's still gets your endorphins going, but you got a job to do, and you do it. And then you get off and you get back into the normal horizontal world, and it's like a crushing load. Now you're in society, and you can feel people looking at you and thinking, they don't know what you've done. They just look at you like a regular person. And you can feel the weight of normality. And it was in that particular case, somebody gave me a capsule of mescaline and said, here, go tour around the tourist bus in the valley, Yosemite Valley. And I did. And I remember telling somebody, I just climbed that. And they said, no, you didn't. They couldn't conceive of it. And what could I do but laugh,
Yeah.
So this was sort of, and I say this not to stand out as odd, but I think when you make movements to open your consciousness, you're out of the world. You generally don't have anyone to talk to. And it's probably best that way, because if you sit down at the feet of some master and say, tell me the answer, it's like you're going to get some more verbal stuff. That's
sure. Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the masters, that we would reference, right? Any Zen Buddhist or any of these people, they would all tell you that they have nothing to teach you, right? That you've already that whatever it is you're looking, you are, you in Hinduism, like you are that, right? So
well, they do one thing I don't like, which is they tell you to listen to them.
Sure, and to suffice to say, the gist of it is, if you go looking for a guru,
you'll find
right.
Yeah.
Then and you find one, then you listen to them, right? That's your path. That doesn't have to be your path, and they'll tell you that just as much, right? You don't go out as a guru teaching students so much as students come seeking you, right? So I think that there's a little bit of a thing there, and again, I think for the most part, most spiritual masters are going to say you don't need really anything other than what you've already got, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're seeking it, I guess, in a way by leveraging some of the psychedelics. Is that kind of what I understand? Like, again, you're looking for this thing, right?
Well, that's how I started. That's how I started.
Okay.
And now we're changing sort of the focus in professions and culture and so forth. And people are coming at it.
Yeah, how are you seeing it? I guess in your professional space, where is it showing up? I understand that traditionally doctors like they shouldn't be taking what it is that they're prescribing, which kind of puts them at a disadvantage. Where are you at in this space? What are you seeing? And I think we talked a little bit about the beginning that you feel like we're in a rocky state.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, for a coincidence of language, some of these psychedelics were translated as medicina. But what a medicina is in a shamanic culture is not what a medicine is in ours, in spite of the similarity of the words. So some of these, I'm thinking of the ones that are making the news these days. What have we got? Ketamine, MDMA, somewhat psilocybin, not so much LSD or ayahuasca, are presented as medicines or potentially medicines. And then we've got pharmaceutical companies scrambling for patents and derivatives, and it's getting a little unseemly. It's starting to sound like money, it's starting to smell like money. And then you're looking at professional practice. And, Western medicine has this paradigm of how the practitioner helps the client. And that's not at all like what the shaman does. The shaman has a different role in the shamanic society than a doctor does in ours. And not a religious role either. Kind of, half spiritual or half spirit. It's like I say, a shaman is the kind of guy you would not want your daughter married to. And I don't think there's any exception to that rule. So we're not really incorporating shamanic wisdom, which is deep. And I think shamanic wisdom is the appropriate wisdom to use to understand psychedelics. And we're not doing that in the medical incorporation.
So
we are doing
like Lincoln.
Say that again.
So, I mean, what does that look like? You believe that we should be doing it in the way that a shaman may. So, expand on how a shaman may assist the psychedelic experience.
Oh dear. Well, there's many threads to this, and I'll take yours just because you asked me to. It would not be the first one I would go on. I would tend to go on what the medicines are doing, what the medicinal people are doing. But the shamanic approach, I think it's a recognition of the value of chaos and destruction in the kind of Hindu sense. Disintegration, reintegration, transformation, transcendence. The shaman, in the cultures I'm familiar with, is not particularly welcome in most cases because they're not really allied to any material, personal agenda. They live in a semi-spiritual world, semi-numinous, and they do strange things, sometimes good, not necessarily good to each other or to people, and they have a strange sense of humor. So they're kind of instruments of chaos, I would say, pretty generally. Shamans are instruments of chaos. And some of them come from an herbal tradition that has healing background or healing agenda. Either they can do both or something like that. And, if you get involved with a shaman, it's like getting involved with a Cheshire cat. They can just disappear and be left with nothing but a smile. And you don't know where they are. because they're basically saying, in my understanding, that the world is not as we see it, that there's more to it, and that the leading influences aren't in our material world. So if you're not in the shamanic world or the transcendent spiritual, world of spirits, you can't really make sense out of the shaman's agenda. It's not entirely there or here, somewhere in between. They're sort of a doorman, not entirely responsible for you. They open the door, they wave their feathers, blow their smoke, and give you the thing to drink. And then they dance around and sing, and it's, up to you it's up to the spirits to help you, not to them. You have to make contacts. You have to be worthy of your own transcendence. And I like that in terms of a model. That was like kind of a mountaineering model. You go out there and you either learn or you get your self slapped down.
Right.
And those are real lessons, but they're dangerous. And they're hard to appreciate because they don't obviously make you money, fame, and, get you adulation. And if they do, watch out, because those are your things, not, their things. So that's the kind of the shamanic model, in my view, is transcendent. It's not entire. You can't really fit it into a spiritual box, a religious box, a political box, a cultural box. It's out of the material world. So if you're a spiritual person, it can make sense. Okay.
So I guess if I had to, kind of self transcendence with like an assist, right?
Yeah.
I really I like how you mentioned, they're there to kind of help open up the door. They're not responsible for you basically after you walk through, right?
Right.
It's like you're like, hey, I think I've talked to some other people that have done the ayahuasca journeys. It's something I've ever done, but it's like you kind of you take the ayahuasca and you kind of hold onto the rails, right? It's like, all right, well, this is here it comes, right? And it's gonna show you some things that you may or may not be prepared for.
I'd like to compare it to, in my own experience, parachute jumping, which I only did it once, but I think once was enough. I'd love to do it more, but I don't think it would be nearly as exciting the second time. So the first time you do parachute jumping, you go out the door and all you have is your belief in how the thing is supposed to work, and some experience in what you're supposed to perform, assume the position, execute these actions, and then control your experience. And that's sort of like what it's supposed to have happen in a psychedelic experience. You go out the door and you pull the ripcord and, the world will unfold below you. But it can be that you go out the door and the parachute doesn't open in the psychedelic experience.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? I had one experience mountaineering where things went sideways. And I found myself, hurtling down the side of a mountain, out of control, in a direction I wasn't supposed to be going. And I was spinning around in the air, bouncing. And I think it'll probably turn out, be written on my gravestone that the greatest thing I did in my life was I just opened my eyes and enjoyed the experience.
Yeah.
And I didn't get freaked out. And obviously I survived.
Right. And I think that's it's a great approach. But I think that we hear a bunch of people express that in different ways too, right? Some people express the, just kind of open my eyes and experience it, but then literally that's all that happened, right? Then did nothing. So, what does that look like for you? Kind of opening your eyes and experiencing life.
Well, part of the answer is it depends what your environment is. So if you're in
today, how did you, Lincoln, what'd you do to experience, kind of open yourself up and experience life today? What did today look like for you?
Well, what I've been doing in the last month has been writing a book. So I go sort of into the space of communication and expression, which is creative and somewhat disciplined because it's got to get into a finished format. And I'm with my 11-year-old son, so that's a interesting view of the world that I'm talking about things. I don't know. We talked about history and other sort of things that adults assume that adults know and kids don't. And it wasn't, psychedelic or particularly unexplored. I do have to watch myself because I do tend to go off the rails. I like to be off the rails.
Sure.
But if you're with other people, they often don't appreciate it. So as a counselor, I have to be careful because other people need to go off the rails, but it's frightening for most people. And part of my job is to help them take off into the rails or out the door, and to apply my, discretion as a guide in their world to make them feel safer in exploring their world. So I tend to I compare myself to the story of Don Quixote and, his faithful servant, Pancho Sanchez. And I'm Pancho Sanchez and they're Don Quixote. And I'm trying to get them to tilt at windmills.
Sure.
And I'm trying to, get them to see the world like Vincent van Gogh, but not cut their ear off like he did.
Right. Yeah, I don't think, there's certain lengths I don't think you have to go to in order to achieve that. So, how's this showing up, I guess, in your practice, right? Are you are you working with others through psychedelics? Are you is it primarily to assist yourself in the psychedelic realm? Because the other thing that you'd mentioned too is like you said you hit it harder, at least once you were in your 40s, but like where is it showing up now for you, and how are you leveraging it in your practice, psychedelics?
Well, the psychedelics are problematic because they're illegal and they're unknown by authorities. The reason I think we're heading for trouble is because there's a standard sort of management dictum of wisdom, which is that you have to have authority with responsibility. If you have the authority to do something, you've got to be responsible for what you decide. And the unsaid third component is you have to be competent, because if you're, incompetent, nothing's going to work out well, even if you do have authority and responsibility. But we do not see those things coming together, those three things. So we see government, which has the authority. They're not taking the responsibility of doing therapy, and they're certainly not competent because they're not therapists. And we have the therapists who are presenting themselves as authorities. They do not have competence because no one knows what this territory means. And they're trying to put the responsibility on the practitioner, the authorities, which is to say the medical, teaching, the institutional, trying to put the responsibility on the therapist. They're trying to teach the therapists how to, what does it mean to be responsible? I guess it means two things. It means your client doesn't hurt themselves, and it means your client doesn't get traumatized, which is to say doesn't feel that they were hurt, roughly. Of course, I also like to say that your client makes progress. But that's always kind of a bugaboo in therapy, because progress, it's not yours to define. You can test them, but that's not really, I don't think that's fair. If somebody feels they made progress, they did. If they didn't, then they didn't. You can say on some metric they changed, but I don't really buy that. That's kind of legalistic. So we don't have these things coming together. And in the every day we have a new institution offering certification on psychedelic therapy. And it just horrifies me because it's still illegal and you still can't learn from doing it unless you do it in the underground, but you're not supposed to do it in the underground. If you're certified, you're supposed to always stay above ground. We can do it in another country, which seems to be the only real way that most of us have done it as therapists. We go to Costa Rica or something, or wherever we go, or we don't talk, sure. Whatever, or we do it at home.
Right. Right.
So that's the rockiness of it. In order to gain responsibility and competence and knowledge, somebody's got to start learning what they're doing. Most of the programs to teach therapists and certify them in psychedelic therapy do not involve ever taking the psychedelic. And how you could gain competence without being there is like being a shaman without ever connecting with the spirits. It's like,
well, Lincoln, do you feel like, is that model broken?
It sounds like it's not there yet. It's not even a model. It's just a proposal.
Well, the proposal, right? Authority, government, and authority, responsibility, and competency. Whereas if we go and we take a look at the shamanic model, we say, all right, well, he's got authority and the responsibility and he's competent, but for I think it's the outcomes that I think deviate a little bit here, right? Like you're saying, there are these other things. I think you didn't mention it on this podcast, but I heard another one of your podcasts where you talked about having a poor psychedelic experience, and I've had plenty of them. But that's also, that's set and setting to. And I wouldn't say I was traumatized or theoretically hurt, but I could definitely see somebody looking back at if this had been in a clinical situation, I'd be like, well, that person did this to me, right?
Right.
Without taking responsibility for myself. Now, if we take a look at this kind of shamanic model, like I'm responsible. This is my mind, right? This is what's happening with me, and I'm responsible. Owning that responsibility is I think a huge part of it. And I would say though, even though I had a poor experience, I felt like those were some of my most progressive experiences, right? Like, those were the things where, man, just like coming out of it, just like unbelievable, right?
Well, that's a new paradigm. I think that's a new paradigm. That the fact that you could feel terrible and feel injured and at the same time think this was the best experience of your life. Some people who've had cancer say that. Well, here's an example that's quite pointed and quite simple. A client can accuse a therapist of anything at all. They can accuse them in public. They can publish it in detail. The therapist cannot say anything at all in defense because it violates client privilege. So that alone should give a therapist some pause, because some people, part of the psychedelic experience, like you said, involves some unpredictable behavior and experience. And how do you fit that in an insurance policy? Because you've got to think of that.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how it's been interesting right now to see psychedelics and the progress that they've made, what they're trying to do with it. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves due to the fact that it's uncontrollable, right? Like it's just basically something you drop it into the mind expansion. You don't know, you have no idea what the outcome's going to be. You really don't.
Well, I want to jump in and say, here's my idea. I think people should approach psychedelics through mind expansion and find out exactly what is going to happen when they take off the brakes or they break through the barrier.
Sure.
So it's like, parachute jumping. First you jump off a platform onto a mattress. And then you get the feeling, right? You get the feeling of, you imagine it.
Right.
And you don't freak out quite, or if you're going to freak out, you do it on the mattress. So there are other ways of trance. And if you're serious about doing something like psychedelics, I think this is what I would say. I would say if you're serious about having a positive experience or a healing experience, then I would hold you to exploring altered states of consciousness without psychedelics, to see just like what you find there, what it looks like, how, whether you really like it or what, and whether I can help you or control you or whatever. And if you don't want to do that, then I think I wouldn't work with you.
No, that makes sense. And that makes sense, right? I think that, again, especially with psychedelics, if somebody's not willing to put in some of that pre-work before the actual adventure, right? That's like, keep going back to your, before you do the parachuting, you got to do the parachute practice stuff, right? You got to do the stuff that makes you feel comfortable to pull the cord and know that you're going to go up there. What is, you mentioned like altered states of consciousness. What are some non-psychedelic ways to enter into that state that you found?
Well, I'd say the simplest is like meditation. How good are you at meditation? It could be very easy, but let's talk about it. Could you actually sit for an hour? And would you have the patience for that? And what came up? And another is hypnotherapy, right? Go into trance, guided meditation. What happens? Some people, there's quite a variety of results. Some people can go into a light trance. Some people go into a heavy trance. I had a client who came to me, and given the circumstances, I was offering past life regression, and they thought this was ridiculous and a fraud, and they were going to play it and just show me how stupid it was. So we did the kind of protocol, and they brought in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and then they got quite upset because they stopped behaving correctly. And other animals started appearing in their mind that were not part of their Disney narrative, and they didn't behave as the animals were. And I was saying, yeah, exactly. That's all it is. It's just what comes in. You can start any way you want with any prejudice you want, but at some point you're trying to get beyond it into the area where you don't know how the characters are supposed to behave, and they start behaving on their own. So that's a trance experience. And I've had other people who, they approach what seems to be rape, and then my role is to say, I don't think we're going to go there. I think, we're just going to teleport right beyond that experience, because I don't know these people. On the other hand, I've had clients who felt that they had childhood sexual abuse. And then the question is, well, just how much do we need to explore? And my answer is only as much as you feel comfortable with.
Right.
So these are things you can do. And let's see, you could do, there's not a lot of in-between stuff besides hypnotherapy, which I like. There's exercise, diet, fasting, meditation.
Sure. But I mean, I think that works, though, right? I think that works, Lincoln. I mean, I was just asking for a couple of ideas there, right? If somebody was like, all right, well, maybe I'm interested. What are some other altered states that I could get into before, leveraging or going all in, right? So I appreciate
and that. Also, there's lower doses, not to. Right.
Well, you don't start off with a 10 strip of acid, right? Like, I just think that's probably a bad idea.
Right. I think so. And set and setting, right?
Setting is super important, right? Yeah. Set and setting. Where are you in your headspace, right? Like, are you really ready? Is today good? Did you have it? If you had a shitty day, I'd say, hey, maybe not today. It's okay.
And do you have a container that you trust in? Do you have a sitter? Do you that kind of stuff?
Right. Yeah.
And are you being pressured, or are you really feeling that you're doing this of your own recognizance?
Right. How would you describe, if you could, the first kind of go round, right? What would somebody, how would you explain it to somebody, a psychedelic experience?
I think well, it depends whether you're asking me whether I just have to state it as a story or whether I can engage them. Because my inclination would be to talk about dreaming
Mm-hmm.
and to try to get them to recall dreaming experiences and to get them to be engaged in participating in their dreaming experiences. So I think that's actually a difficult thing to do. It's certainly easier to take a pill. To become involved in your dreaming means you have to have some control of your sleep, and then you have to learn how your intentions affect your dreams. And then ultimately, to some extent, you may become lucid in a dream. And then I think you have something to talk about, like the experience, the psychedelic experience can be like a dream experience.
Mm-hmm.
More or less, it can be more or less controlled. But it's the same sort of feeling that this is real and I am real, but this doesn't make sense.
Right.
And often I don't remember either who I was, where I was, or what's going on.
Right.
And if a monster comes up in that situation, you can be really stressed out.
Yeah.
At the same time, if something like an angel comes up, you can be really inspired.
Right.
But that would be how I'd talk about it. Like, start
That
talking
makes sense.
about
No, I
dreaming.
like it. I like it. Right. So a little bit, kind of like, if you can think about lucid dreaming and being in a dream state, similar, phases, I would say. And I guess I'm using the word phase and like, kind of material and bodily phase, mind states. Okay. Well, hey, we're at a spot, Lincoln, where I usually like to ask a couple different questions, if you're good for it.
Yeah.
Because basically, look, man, I look at this podcast is a little bit like spiritual speed dating, right?
Right,
Like,
man.
you're going to be on here, somebody else is tuning in. They're like, well, it is called spiritual dope. They're looking for their next hit. They're looking for their next person to follow, be with, and learn from for a little bit. And Lincoln, it could be you, man. Could be you.
Well, like I'm saying, I'm talking for the culture. Part of me is just talking for the culture.
That's it. Well, let me ask you a couple questions here, and I'm going to call you Spiritual Bachelor number one. How does one obtain true peace?
Oh, damn. I think by not looking for it. I don't think it's like, how do you get rich? What do you go out trying to make money? No. Peace is redefined, like wealth is redefined. So I think you look for your power and you look for your opportunity and you have a commitment to yourself. And in that combination, you find peace. And if you combine those things and you don't find peace, well, then I think you got a problem of the combination, not a lack of opportunity.
A little bit like baking a cake, huh? You got to get the ingredients right, and the mixture's got to go in right, and it's kind of got to go in a certain order. You also said that this is you brought it up earlier too. Like, if you go chasing it, it becomes elusive.
It does, but another thing I harp on is you got to make mistakes, and they've got to be okay, and maybe even, as we said before, fun.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my greatest, most fun experiences have been windsurfing when I've wiped out, right? Wipeouts can be really fun. Losing control can be hysterical. People are adventure seekers. I think people who are taking psychedelics, unless they think they've been promised something, which is probably a bad idea, have to have a sense of adventure and willingness to. It's very mythological. Like, if you read, like I'm reading to my son, he's 11, so here I've got this thing. Some of these fantasy books that have monsters and angels and good and bad guys, and you imagine yourself that it's not a fantasy. That's really the dream you're going to have. Demons, guides, immortality, hell, if you can navigate that, it's probably going to feel real. Something like that's going to feel real. I forgot what your question was, but that was my answer.
It's all right. It's all right. It was what was the question? How does one obtain true peace? Right.
Yeah.
So let's see. What is geez, you probably deal with a number of depressed people. I don't know. Why are so many people depressed?
Well, I don't know. I'm the right one to answer. Of course, I'm not the right one to answer any of these things. But I would guess that it's confusion and struggle and change. I would say the culture is undergoing change, and we as agents of it are lacking in what we're being directed to do, what we're being rewarded for doing. Change agents, I mean, they say don't shoot the messenger. We always shoot the messenger, and we're the messengers. That's the and that's kind of depressing. So, I mean, get over it, you know.
You signed up to get shot. Well, Lincoln, really appreciate you being on here today. You've got such a vast wealth of knowledge and experiences. I know we barely touched on it. Where can people come and find out a little bit more about what you have to offer?
Go to my website at mindstrengthbalance.com. All, no separations, all run together, mindstrengthbalance.com, and sign up for the blog. And it's free. It's monthly. And if you want it weekly, you pay a small amount and you get weekly. And then there are books, and there's new books coming out, and they're linked on the website. And I'll talk to anybody for a half an hour for nothing if you call the number and
Nice.
give them direction.
Nice. Well, fantastic. I think that's a great way to be, offering that time. It's the people, some people aren't willing to offer that kind of time at all. I know that I reached out to some people and I had to pay for the time just to have a conversation, right? Just to see if the conversation was worth having. But hey, everybody dictates how they want to live their own life, and you're doing it to be of service. So Lincoln, thank you again for your time here today, reaching out and
You're welcome, Brennan. It's been great. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brendan@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.